There's a strange and wondrous blur that develops in Valeria Luiselli's Lost Children archive, where you have to kind of disentangle the real and unreal worlds of the novel. And I say wondrous because it's a real feat in storytelling that she develops here, and it's also horrifying in the end because you realize the sharp edges of the real world that she's describing, and the awful realities that she describes in this novel, the non-fictional stuff that is at the base of the novel. So, in kind of thinking about the complexities here, thinking about what's real and unreal in the novel, she's exploring the boundaries between the real and the unreal throughout the novel, and that's not only in terms of that non-fictional world of migration and political responses to it, but also how language engages the real and the unreal here, and in what ways does language uncover the realities, and in what ways is the language sometimes used to obscure the realities of that world. So she develops a series of parallels between the fictional and the non-fictional worlds here. The story of the lost children of the elegies, the children coming north in migration, against the fictionalized story of the two children, the boy and the girl, and their disappearance into the desert. So she's telling the story of the children, her children, the narrator's children, against the journalistic realities of migration and the children coming north from Central America into the United States, and the realities of their lives. She tells that story through various means. You get like straight up storytelling and a narrative of language, a chronological series of events that's described, explored, probed in all kinds of ways in the novel. But you also get story told through a collection of lists of books, lists of other kind of multimedia things, and you get the story told through echoes, bits and pieces of history that are kind of echoing around within the novel itself, and a story that's told through a series of photos at the end. When you get to the end of the novel, how do you regard those Polaroids, that series of Polaroids that could be from the journey, could be just a collection of random photographs that she used to pull the story together. So that box 7, how you read that as a narrative, it kind of gets to the heart of what's real and unreal within the storytelling here. Against these things too, you have the echoes of the history and violences of the American Southwest and the Mexican North, right? A boundary that's moved in history, a boundary that has in some ways has kind of has had some more substantive moments of definition, and sometimes less substantive moments of definition. How solid the histories are here, and how real the violences are, become part of the boundaries of the real and unreal that she's exploring here. And then maps themselves, right? How real or unreal are maps, particularly of a space that is so undefined as desert? How do you map the geographies of the unreal desert, as she'll explore on page 315 here? Do you trust the map to tell the story? Underneath the storytelling here is the boy's Polaroid camera that he gets, right? And he's taking pictures throughout the journey. And early on they learn that you can't just let the Polaroid develop in full light, that you have to place it within the pages of a book for the Polaroid to develop clearly. And so they kind of go through a trial and error process where the Polaroids sometimes are marked by light, and sometimes that they don't develop properly. So the whole novel itself has moments where that kind of haziness of an unreal photograph, or a series of photographs that are trying to tell a story, develop. And this is an instance of one of those, right? The moment where they're at the fence and looking at the plane loaded with children being returned to Central America. So how does that sense of the Polaroids kind of rest underneath the storytelling here? At one moment, right, as they go through the desert, the boy and the girl, the boy notes, so lost inside light that we were sure the world around us was slowly fading, becoming unreal. That the world becomes unreal as they journey into the desert. How do you draw a line between what's real and unreal here? Against that, kind of the Polaroids, you can think about the photo itself as a journalistic act, right? I hear a photo from Central American migrants headed north on La Bestia, the train route that runs north. It's described in the elegies. The sharpness of this, right? The ways in which it kind of establishes a sense of reality, against the Polaroids of the novel. She tries to kind of build a sense of what it's like to try to travel north on the train, and as the children take their journey north towards the American North, that it felt like walking on the spine of an enormous worm or beast, she writes on page 288. And then the experience of riding on the train as it starts to move again, as they leave one of the encampments, the ground scattered with personal belongings, the desert sand like an ocean flowing backward after a shipwreck, the broken, beautiful rubbish there on the ground as the train passes around and over it. So she's trying to develop a sense of what it might be like to ride that train, and then also how do you tell that story, or is that story best told within the sharpness of a photograph, of simple human bodies, precariously atop the train as it moves along on its journey north. You can also think about the desert as wasteland here, and you have various maps. Some of the maps, in fact, that mark the spots where dead bodies have been found, of people who've crossed the border, and have died traveling across the desert. How the children, as they travel through the wastelands here, when they go off on their journey together, how they experience that wasteland is interesting. How they feel it is real or unreal. At one point, the boy notes, "I wondered if we were hearing the sound of all the dead in the desert, all the bones there." So the desert becomes a collecting place, of the echoes of the dead, of those who have died there, still speaking out or crying out in some way. And then against that, right, the realities of those bones, right? You have the moment where they meet up with the children of the elegies, the lost children, and they meet each other in that railroad car. As the boy notes, they're clearly not a lost desert echo as they approach the car and hear the children. 4 round faces, so real I didn't believe they were real. And so, what's real and what's unreal here is an interesting question for the reader. How do you read the reality of the children there? How do you read the realities of the boys and the girls' perspectives as they pass through this wasteland? Is it possible to know the real there? And then finally, how sound and language work here as real substance is an interesting question that Louis Selle explores. Note, like any point in the novel where you have these moments where names are shouted out or names are given. On page 108, each of the family members adopts an Apache name, for instance. But then there are these other moments on 300 and 308 where you have the names shouted as kind of an act of recognition, and I know who you are kind of thing. And so how important language and sound is to being real and to being called out as real in the end. The desert wasteland that the children in the elegy cross is a space that threatens that reality, right? That threatens life. It is a world completely foreign which will swallow them into its namelessness, as the story notes on page 328, right? That the losing your name, losing the sound of who you are, is an annihilating experience, and it's always threatened. The realities of that annihilation are always present there. And then you get that moment, right, where the parents find the children, in Echo Canyon, and there's the moment where they are shouting out the children's names, and the boy notes, right, as he hears his parents' voices, "Your beautiful name, it came back mighty and powerful all around us, Memphis." As he looks to his sister and hears his sister's name called out, it's a moment of recognition. It's a moment of salvation for the children. And so sound and language there become, the very act of a real salvation in the novel.